Let's go.
Take those pills. Take those pills. Hey, here you go. Itching, sweating, take those pills. Thirsty, drowsy, take those pills. Worms, take those pills. I think you should take it. Oh. Itching, sweating, take those pills. Thirsty, drowsy, take those pills. Worms, take those pills. I think you should take it. Oh. Itching, sweating, take those pills. Thirsty, drowsy, take those pills. Worms, take those pills. Itchy all day. Here you go.
Let's go.
Take those pills. The full 30 days. Here you go. Hey, take those pills. Allergy pills. I think you should take it. Okay. Take those pills. The full 30 days. Here you go. Hey, take those pills. Allergy pills.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Take those pills. The full 30 days. Here you go. Hey, take those pills. I think you should take it. Okay. Take those pills. The full 30 days. Here you go. Hey, take those pills. Allergy pills. I think you should take it. Take these pills. Those pills again. Take these pills. Take these pills again. Itching, sweating. Take those pills. Thirsty, drowsy. Take those pills. Worms. Take those pills. I think you should.
Association Chat will get started in just a second, but before that, let's hear from Blake Alvin for this episode's podcast tip.
Associations are usually trying to communicate with existing members and attract new members, and sometimes communicating information to the public. With so many forms of media available, it can be hard to know which is best for which situation. You can spend a ton of time, energy, and money really quickly. But what's the best way to maximize your efforts? Video is one of those options. Now, I'm not against video, but to do video well constantly can be costly and take a great team. And once you have a great video, getting somebody to sit down, watch, and absorb the information can be tricky also. I want to repeat those words again. Sit down, watch, absorb. With a well-made audio show, the audience is now freed from the screen and all the distractions that go with it. You can listen to a podcast anywhere. On a daily commute, at your kid's Little League game, mowing the lawn, vacuuming, doing your expense report, going for your daily run, making dinner, going to lunch. This allows the listener to find out more about your organization and topics on their time and when they want it. And if done right, it can be more intimate, technical, and human all at the same time. So to sum up, a podcast is cheaper than video, very intimate, eyes-free and on-demand, typically gets longer listen times with a deeper dive, and is easier to get somebody who's camera shy. So give a podcast a try. You can thank me later. For more tips and tricks and free information about podcasting, go to humanfactor.net.
This episode of Association Chat is sponsored by Fontiva at fontiva.com. Go check them out.
Welcome to Association Chat, produced by Amplified Growth and Human Factor, talking about all things association, nonprofit, and anything else that pops into my mom's head. And now, here is your host, Kiki L'Italian. Better not screw it up, Mom.
Oh, why does she say that every time? There's so much pressure.
About you. She's worried about you.
There's so much pressure, Blake.
Under pressure.
I can't handle it. Can't handle it.
Sorry.
All right.
Sorry about this.
It's okay.
Welcome, everybody.
Yes. Welcome, everybody, to Association Chat. I'm so glad that you're here this week because we have a fantastic guest. Blake, do you know what we're talking about today?
No.
Well, you're going to be so excited to find out that even though you know me,
I know you.
You know me, and I can help you with all kinds of things.
You have.
But did you know that it might be my friends or my friends' friends that could actually help you more than I could?
Wait a minute, what'd you just say?
I know, I'm confused too.
I'm pushing buttons while I'm doing this.
No, I'm confused too. However, our guest today is going to be able to clear it all up for us.
Really?
Yes.
Is there anything we need to do first? Sponsor ads or anything? We were going to get it all out of the way.
Well, if people are not watching this and they're listening to it, they should understand that this is being brought to you by Association Chat, Amplified Growth, Human Factor, and Fontiva.
Yay.
Ding, 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 ding. Okay, yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
For being a sponsor, and thank you for reminding me. All right, so as we're getting started today, and I'm so glad I'm seeing people come into the live stream over here on YouTube, I want to introduce our guest. And today we have with us David Burkus. He is a best-selling author, sought-after speaker. He is a business school professor. You can watch his TED Talks like I did. I had to do a little bit of homework ahead of time. I even ordered his book, you guys. His latest book here is Friend of a Friend. And one day maybe I will get this thing signed. I don't know, David. What do you think?
We can definitely do that. And by the way, I totally apologize in advance for the confusion, because the cover, while I think it's one of the coolest like nonfiction covers, has like 16 Friend of a Friends on it. So that's probably where your friends and friends
it's
of
a friends of the friends. It's a frenzy of friends.
Oh yeah.
Yes. And so, so I'm actually really excited about this whole concept because I was talking with my friend Adele, my friend, not a friend of a friend.
Yeah, we're gonna do that a lot for this.
This probably happens every conversation.
Every single time.
Yes. So, but I was talking with Adele, and you know Adele, and she was telling me about this idea of weak ties. You talk about this idea of weak ties in the book. And, you know, we were talking about the fact that it is really, truly how it's these connections of other people. You know, we know people, and it's their connections that help us get along. But you've done a lot of research into this. You have written this book that explains why it's understanding these weak ties that can help us to, you know, reach greater success. And so can you talk to me a little bit about, you know, what is this concept? You know, how did you happen across it? What is this concept? What do we need to know about it? High level.
Yeah. So, I mean, high level, we should start back at, I think, this idea that like everyone sort of knows networking is important, that it's who you know, not necessarily what you know. It's really, I mean, it's both, but who you know is important, right? And everyone also has, truthfully, I think most people also have kind of icky, I don't want to use the term associations because it's different meaning.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, don't say that on this show.
Not association, Jack.
I know, right? But it feels like, I mean, networking literally makes some people feel dirty a lot of times, right? And I think that's because most of us think about it in the context of, it just means meeting strangers. That networking is just, what do you do to turn a stranger into a contact, to trade business cards or put them in your sales funnel if you're in the sort of sales networking space. And for most people, that doesn't really resonate. But at the same time, they know that their personal connections have been hugely beneficial to their lives. They know, I mean, everybody would agree that, you know, they ought to be spending more time with their friends and family and loved ones, et cetera. So we know that the network that's around you is important. What I think is interesting that we dive into in Friend of a Friend is that the network around them is also important too. So the way that I often say it is that you don't have a network, you can't grow your network, you can't build your network, et cetera. You already exist inside of a network. And the thing that you need to do is to understand where you are in it currently, where you want to be, how you need to navigate it to achieve the things that you want to achieve. Weak ties is one of those pieces, right? So we think a lot of times that when we have a big problem, we go most often to our close contacts, the people that know us well, the people that are highly motivated to help us. The problem is that a lot of those people think the same way we do. They have access to similar introductions that we would already have access to. The term in sociology is actually redundancy, meaning like if A is connected to B and B is connected to C, then A is probably already connected to C in these close contacts. So they're redundant. And this is where your weak and your dormant ties come in. These are people you know, but you don't know that well. Maybe you only ever see them once a year at an association meeting, for example. You know them, but you don't know them that well. And because you don't know them that well, their close cluster of people is a different group. So they're more likely to provide new introductions, new ideas, new perspectives than are your close contacts. And unlike the total strangers that we're trying to win over in the course of one cocktail party, these weak ties are already your connections, they're already your friends. So we can skip that rapport building stage and they're already motivated to help you. They just have access to different information than your close contacts do. And that kind of makes that information better.
Well, it's so interesting because one of the stories I heard you tell, and I heard several different interviews with you and presentations that you've given. you tell this story about two people who had gone to school together, and they ran into each other at a reunion. And that's how I found out that you haven't gone to any of your reunions, your high school reunions, right? but you...
Oh, no. Now I'm trying to remember which interview I even said that on. But
yeah. So I haven't gone to any of my high school. Have you gone to any of yours, Blake?
No.
But okay,
I have not.
But this story...
Who goes to those?
Apparently these people...
And I have to say, technically it was not a high school reunion.
Oh, really?
So here's the story.
Okay.
So you're teasing up the story of Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta, which if you're a fan of mixed martial arts like myself,
I saw the belts.
You already know these names almost. Yeah. Thank you.
Are those yours? No.
Are they yours?
They
are.
They
really?
So I've been doing, I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the last 13 years.
So wait a minute, hold on. We got to explain this.
Yeah.
When we were first coming on, we were snooping in your apartment there, your house, and we saw your belts. They're right behind you. You want to point at one?
Mm-hmm. My point one.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
This one. So this one's actually my favorite because this
put it on?
I won. No, I'm not going to put it on.
Nice try.
I won it 2 days before my first son was born. Basically, it was like, thank you. There was a competition in a city about 90 minutes away from me, and I had it on my radar, but I wasn't really thinking about it because like at any given moment, we're going to go into labor and we're going to have this baby. So I woke up just 2 days before, and I kind of looked at my wife and I was like, how are you feeling today? And she's like, I haven't had a contraction. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to go drive over there and do this tournament. And I mean, if anything happens, I'll drop anything and drive back. So I think literally the fact that it was like clear mind, no stakes, didn't psych myself out, didn't choke, etc. We ended up doing really, really well. And I got to take that home and this. Yeah. So anyway, that has nothing to do with the Dana.
That's
what?
Incredible.
I think it's cool, though.
I do too. I think it's really, really interesting.
I used to train at UFC.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I got beat up a lot.
Didn't
that tends to happen.
Didn't Anthony Bourdain
I have no idea.
His ex-wife end up?
Anthony Bourdain, I think even got up to purple belt, which is a solid mid-range. That's about a 4 or 5 years of training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In New York, he trained with a good group of people, etc. Yeah. So Bourdain, David Mamet, who wrote Glenn Ross, is a famous playwright that's in it. And there's a number of different celebrities that have trained in. It's a cool little, truthfully, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fans, it's a cool little sub network or informal network of people that can be quite beneficial. I feel like, for example, a lot of times I'll plop down in a city because I'm speaking at an event or something like that. And if I know the most common examples, if I'm on the West Coast, I know that means I'm probably going to stay the night after or whatever. I'll try and find a gym through friend of a friend connections or whatever and go in and train the night after I've given a speech, which makes for the funniest. So what do you do and what brings you into town conversations with a lot of people at the gym. I
bet.
But it's a really cool sort of, again, sub network of people in the U.S. and globally that train together.
So as I say, we can tie this right in, Kiki.
No, I know. And
you have lots of friends in the jiu-jitsu world. How's that helped you?
Yeah.
Well, he's going to tie this back.
I'm getting to the tie here. Yeah.
So, part of it is just knowing the particular story of Dana and Lorenzo. Part of it is you never know when it comes up. So this is not the first time I've been talking to this. One of my favorite interviews was with Tom Bilyeu of Impact Theory. We spent probably like 40 minutes talking, and 15 minutes of that was talking about jiu-jitsu and life lessons. So I don't want to repeat myself too much because we can just like say, hey, go over here and watch this. Anyway, but it made me know this story of Dana and Lorenzo Fertitta. And what a lot of people sort of don't know, right? The UFC, when it started, mixed martial arts as a whole, it was, the nicest thing to call it is probably a freak show. Like the idea was literally, let's recreate like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter, but in real life. Let's get people from lots of different styles. The crazier the martial arts outfits, the better, right? So you had those people with like the black belts down to their knees and whatever. And let's get them all together and just brawl. But inside of that, right, it was kind of already sort of known that in a one-on-one competition, jiu-jitsu was going to come out on top because it was much more about what happens when a fight hits the ground and all of these things. But when it was that freak show, it was incredibly, unfortunately, it was incredibly bloody, right? It was incredibly, like, you had people that are 300 pounds fighting people that are 160. I mean, it deserved to be in the hot water that it was in, and it was on the verge of being banned. Dana is an interesting character. So Dana bounced around between New England and Las Vegas. attended a high school in Las Vegas along with Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta, his brother, and knew them from that world. But then he actually got kicked out of high school. So he got kicked to go move with his grandmother back in New England area. I wish I could have found that, because it would have made for a great joke in the book. I could never find the reason. No one would tell me what reason it was that he got kicked out. So anyway, he gets kicked out. Eventually, he sort of finds his way through the boxing gym community. He finds his way back to Vegas, and he's also managing fighters in this early rendition of the UFC. Now, the thing that a lot of people know about Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta is that they are the heirs to the Fertitta gambling empire, right? Station casinos, that whole world. And so what you have are these two people. One is running around managing fighters in this on the verge of being banned in every state sport. The other is running casinos, which are often hosting boxing and kickboxing and regulated forms of combat sport. And they run into each other at a high school friend's wedding. So Dana's back in Vegas now, so he gets invited to go to this person's wedding. And I, again, couldn't verify this, but I always like to think of them like they're at the buffet line across the tables from each other, like serving their pasta or their rubber chicken or whatever it was, and you look up and like there they are. They catch up. They start talking about how they both really enjoy jiu-jitsu and both really enjoy mixed martial arts, and they share what they're doing and what have you. And the conversation actually kind of just trails off from there. And it's a couple months later that Dana, through his connections managing fighters, realizes, okay, this is what's on the verge of happening. The original investors and owners of this UFC contest are going bankrupt. The sport is about to be banned. Something needs to change. So he calls his new old friend Lorenzo and says, I think the UFC is probably going to be for sale, and I think you should buy it. And lays out his whole plan that they can acquire it and he'll manage it and they'll get it regulated the way the Fertittas are already used to, because they have connections to the Nevada State Athletic Commission and they have connections to the casinos that can house the events and all these things. Never would have happened had they not both gone to that high school friend's wedding. And it's an example of that power of weak ties. It's also an example of what happens a lot of times when people create bridges between what are called in network science lingo structural holes, the gaps between different clusters. So for a variety of different reasons, in the early days of the UFC, they really appealed to this kind of fringe. They were off in their own little cluster, just trying to do, they advertised themselves as the most brutal sport in the world, and they were trying to appeal to that group of people. Meanwhile, the Fertittas are over here in a different cluster of highly regulated combat athletics contests like boxing and what have you. And it wasn't until that connection's made that they could sort of bridge a gap and start to take some of this over to here and some of this over to here and create something that became what was, at the time that Fertitta sold it, it was valued at, I think, $4.2 billion, which is roughly the same amount of money that Lucasfilm was purchased for from Disney, right? So you have, you have a sports league, and not the NFL or NBA or anything like that, but you have a sports league valued at the same level as the Star Wars franchise, just because these two people met, or re-met, I should say, at a high school friend's wedding.
But here's the challenge I have with that, because I think it's such a fascinating story, and the research is there. I mean, you're taking this from Christakis and these different researchers who came out. And Christakis and I forget the other person, but they put out a book called Connected, which is a really great book that I happened to read like several years ago and did not make the brilliant connections that you made here. But it's like, I look at this information and I think, how does that impact what I do or how I change the way that I approach those connections that I have now? Because I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but when I'm approaching, in association land, you know how it is. It is networking event after networking event after networking event, and you go in, and we're trying desperately to care what the other person's saying, to not stand in the corner by ourselves, to not just stand.
You weren't listening to me at that event?
Not at all, and to like not hang out with the people that you already know, like we all get guilty of doing, and staying in our safe zones. So how do we take this information and begin to apply it?
Yeah, so a couple of things. This is actually in the weak ties area. This is actually something that I think association events, both annual events and regional chapters, what have you, that the networking hours are actually tailor made for, is that weak ties approach. So here's why. There's a really interesting study that tracked people at one of these unstructured cocktail party like hours. There's about 100 people in terms of participants. And because they were all also students in an executive MBA program, they had a bunch of data on where they came from, who they also knew, and all that sort of thing. And they surveyed them ahead of time and said, what are you trying to get from this residency program and this even just this opening day that ended with this cocktail hour? And not unlike every survey of associations ever, networking, making new connections was one of the top things that was on there, right? So essentially what happened was people then came to the event and they used these little RFID tags to track who talked to whom throughout the whole event. And people spent the majority of their time, 62% of the time was spent talking to people that they already knew, or people who were really, really similar to them, or already like a friend of a friend to each other, not meeting the total strangers, right? And this effect gets replicated, and it's basically people don't mix at mixers, right? Because we've all been there. Like you were just talking about, you've all been there. You're drawn. I mean, you haven't. First of all, I mean, it's a benevolent thing too. You haven't seen certain people in a really long time, so you want to catch up with them. But then even if you didn't, it's uncomfortable. And especially if you're not like the super extroverted, bubbly type personality, these events are like torture.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So my advice to a lot of places is, okay, like these events are going to happen, and that reconnecting with weak ties is important. So just make a plan to do it there, right? Just like forgive yourself that you're not going to walk out of that part of the event. There's much more to the event than usually just that cocktail hour or what have you. Forgive yourself that that's probably not going to be the time where you're making new contacts. But there are a couple things you can do inside of that.
All right.
Which is you're going to meet weak ties. Can you be the connector for 2 or 3 weak ties that you're going to meet at that event, right? So you're going to reconnect with 4 or 5 people that you already knew. Do they all know each other, or can you be the linchpin to them and make a point to introduce them? There's a whole fascinating line of research around, the fancy schmancy network science term is preferential attachment. Ooh. But essentially, as you move towards the center of a network and one of the people that connects everyone inside that network, whether it be an industry network or what have you, you also become the person for whom a lot of new connections are made passively. You don't actually have to put a lot of work into it. Other people see you connecting lots of people and start to introduce you to new people. So you can leverage it in that context. In terms of actually wanting to get to know new people, because again, one of the primary goals of this is getting to know more people, more diverse people inside the industry and what have you. This is actually where the research kind of suggests that shared activities are a more beneficial way. And a shared activity is a really specific type of activity where the goal is not connecting. The goal is something else, right? You're there for some other reason. Could be anything though. Could be that you're volunteering for, a charity function.
Yes, I've been seeing so many of those lately where it's like the early morning get together and people end up talking and sharing. They meet really well over that because I think the pressure's off, right? The pressure's off of like...
Right, no, this is exactly right. So it could also be, it could be an athletics thing. I'm seeing more and more conferences, for example, do certain, yoga over here, or we're all going to go for a run over here, or whatever it is. The pressure's off. People drop their script. It draws a more diverse set of people. And most of the time, those things require some level of interdependence anyway, even if it's literally just coordinating whose mat goes where in the case of like a yoga example. Yeah. So you end up having those little conversations that are the spark that hopefully you see that person throughout the rest of the day. And now you have a more beneficial conversation. But a lot of it is that it just gets people to drop the script. They're not focused on the awkwardness of meeting strangers. They're focused on something else. And then they meet people when they look to their left and their right that are new connections. So these types of shared activities are a far better use of time in terms of meeting new connections than the unstructured. And
it sounds like they're also doing something that they enjoy probably too. It's not like we're forced. We're doing yoga or whatever.
So now we get into a fascinating line of research called another fancy network science term for you is called multiplex.
Multiplexity.
In other words, multiplex.
I like it.
Right? A multiplex being a movie theater which has multiple screens. Okay. No, actually, it's probably a true definition.
That's another one. That's the other definition.
Complexity.
So
multiplied.
Multiplexity is a fancy term for the number of contexts for connection that you have with someone. Okay. So if you just know each other in a work context, we would call that in network science a uniplex tie. But if you know each other in a work context, you also love yoga and your kids are around the same age, so you have sort of shared experiences there, or what are sometimes called uncommon commonalities. You have things in common with them that most of the room doesn't have in common. The research says you build a deeper relationship faster with that person. So this is why the shared activities right off the bat are good. But you also make it more likely that you're going to stay in touch with that person, because now you have a couple different things that could trigger you in their mind, or them, you in their mind, or them in your mind, and be a reaching out for a weak tie type of connection. And then the other thing is just like, it's human. It's part of being a human, is understanding that humans are multifaceted. Yeah. And so you win when you're multifacinated with them, not just that transactional, what can you do for me thing. So these activities also leverage that multiplexity piece, which is, I think, huge. And my advice for everybody is, okay, you need to go to both, but recognize the limitations of human psychology. These unstructured events are probably better for weak ties, because that's going to be what everybody does anyway. Mm-hmm. These shared activities are probably where you're going to end up growing and learning. You're growing your network. I just said you can't grow your network, but you know what I mean? Meeting new contacts, etc. And of course, if you're at the unstructured event and you want to leverage multiplexity, the advice I give to a lot of people is like, change up the questions that you ask. Instead of the "so what do you do" question that no one wants to answer. Yeah. Ask about hobbies and ask about potential shared interests. Ask about what favorite sports are. My favorite thing, it's kind of nerdy, but you can probably tell from right there if you're watching this in the live stream. One of my favorite questions to ask is, who's your favorite superhero? Yeah. Because almost everybody either has a favorite superhero and a story behind why that's their favorite, or they hate superheroes. And there's a really good story about that too. And you can usually find something to bond over that is not just, oh yeah, we work in the same industry. Of course we work in the same industry. We're at this association meeting.
Same event.
Kiki, who's your favorite superhero?
You know, I've been thinking about that. So because I think.
Oh, you read the book and you already knew that?
Well, I've seen some interviews, and where they were talking, actually, where the interviewer said, "Now, I've heard you ask this question before," and then they already had. So they asked him what his favorite.
Him mean David.
David, yes. Okay. Sorry, I'm sorry.
I'm still
you
here.
Are still
though.
here.
No.
But actually, I'll have to say that it's not exactly a superhero. That I have to go with. I love Neil Gaiman and his whole.
Neil Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman. He's an author.
What's his superpower?
He's a fantastic writer.
It's so boring.
No, he's amazing.
Well, he writes a lot about Norse mythology, which influences a lot of superheroes.
I would say that some of his characters are like, they're like gods or like superheroes. And so I would say that probably Dream or,
Dream?
Yeah, Morpheus.
Now let me ask you a question.
Sandman.
Let me ask you a question. So you're at a meeting and you discover that somebody else is a Neil Gaiman
fan. It's happened.
They're like your best friend in the world now, right?
Yes, because this actually happened. It's somebody, I won't call her out, but she's somebody at the American Society of Association Executives, Melody. And she said something online about Neil Gaiman, and I said something back. And a few days later, there was this mysterious package that arrived at my door.
Whoa.
And she sent me this really cool comic that came from Neil Gaiman. And I mean, that is what can happen when you have these uncommon commonalities, right?
Commonalities.
Yeah. No, it was such a great experience. And now, of course, we know each other as like we're both really into Neil Gaiman, It's very cool.
Yeah. It's like, even if you, not to get too transactional, but if you needed a reason to reach out to Melody, right? You have that in common. So basically, anytime there's new news about Gaiman or about Sandman or about anything, you've got at least a reason to send her an email and start that conversation.
That's so true.
Which you don't get if you just stay in that uniplex world. You only get if you go after multiplexity when you're looking to meet.
It's true. I'm getting ready to go to the ASAE Winter Harvest Foundation event
Where's
Thursday.
That?
This Thursday, actually.
I was not invited.
DC. I know. Well, did you donate?
No.
Okay. Well,
I'm donating time now.
Not to them. And so, looking at these conversations and how I can think a little bit differently about, what these connections are that I have and building up those dormant ties, that's something that I want to work on. And so thinking when you go into a conversation that you're not just going to zone immediately into what can you do for me and what can I do for you? Taking a little time to get to know people.
Well, I abandoned that a long time ago, but I do have a question if we go back for David. So that study where they said they study the people and their proximity and all, Do you think it's necessarily a bad thing? Because Kiki, you and I met at something, and we had the idea to do this.
Yeah.
Is it a bad thing that we're talking to the people we know? In your opinion?
So, I mean, so that's what I was getting at is no, if you understand that's what's going to happen anyway.
Yeah. So don't feel bad.
I think what happens is that people's natural inclination is to talk to the weak and dormant ties, talk to people they already know to catch up and what have you. But yet, like, we do this thing every year, if it's an annual event, or even every month if we're going to like a regional chapter thing, where we end up kicking ourselves because we go, okay, this time I'm going to meet this many new people and blah, blah, and then we don't do it. And there's no point kicking yourself. Just know that like everyone's in that boat. It's proven through science, right? That's how people act. So know that and kind of lean into that and say, okay, it's during this unstructured event that I'm going to reconnect with all of those weak ties and make that my goal. And then maybe if you're wanting to do a little bit more and sort of expanding your influence in the network, make it a goal that plays into that, which is why I was saying, okay, my goal is to reconnect with 4 or 5 weak ties, but I'm going to try and introduce 2 people that I know that don't know each other while I'm there. Now you've got something that can still happen in that context of already knowing each other. To just say, I'm going to give like the perfect elevator pitch and I'm going to walk out with 12 new business cards. You're not going to do it. And then if you are, you're probably going to be remembered as the sleazy weirdo. So it's probably not a good idea to go for that route anyway.
Right? I mean, can we all agree we don't want to be the sleazy weirdo? I feel like that's something that's not an uncommon commonality. I think that's a common commonality.
Hey, what's your, you got your card?
I sure do. Can we trade 5? I got to get rid of 5 cards before I leave here today.
That's right.
You're going to get all 5 of them, Blake. All right. So Layla says over here, among women, I found a great way to network is to wear something interesting. Shoes, necklace, etc. Fascinating icebreaker. Yes. And that's such a good point. Actually, if you ever met Layla, you would know that, I mean, her hair is very vibrantly colored and it's exquisite, really. But how many conversations I've watched people approach her just to discuss her hair, which is amazing. And so I'm not going to do that with my hair, not today. I might do it in the future. But yeah, I think that figuring out ways to have these to make yourself more approachable so that you can even enter into those conversations can be a good thing.
Sure.
Yeah. That brings me to creativity. All right. Because David's actually written several books.
Well, it was the multicolored hair comment.
Well, it was. I was wondering what you did.
No, I love it.
And so you have one of the things that I wanted to go into. I know that this is supposed to be about friend of a friend, but one of the things that you have talked about is you've talked about the myths of creativity in one of your other books. And you talk about the truth about how innovative companies and people generate great ideas.
Which book is that? We should plug the book.
I have it up on his website. Yes. If you go to my screen.
We'll go to that right now.
If you go to davidburkus.com, for those people who are listening, /books, you'll be able to check out all of his books that are
The Myths of Creativity.
There. Yeah.
Can we get a list, maybe? A list of myths? They love that in this radio business stuff, Dave.
Do they like that?
Yeah. Lists are great.
I don't.
Well, there's 10 of them, so that
might be the top 3, starting with 3. How about that?
All right. So, I mean, I think the first is this idea, the biggest, and we actually unpack it in 2 different myths. It was so big we had to break it up. It's just this idea that it hits some people and it doesn't hit others. Like we either talk about creativity like it's a religion, right? We talk about feeling inspired or being visited by the muses and what have you. And even if we don't believe in like 9, it's either 9 or 7 sisters, like the Greek muses, we'll still say things like, and then it just came to me, right? Which is like, where was it before and how did it get to you? And all of those things are like, that's still sort of around visitation and what have you. And then not unlike a religion, we'll talk about who's in and who is out. We'll talk about who's creative and who's not and all of those sort of things. And in reality, like I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I've seen a lot because of that, pre-K, kindergarten, first grade classrooms. I don't know of an uncreative kid, right? So whenever we separate the creatives from the non-creatives, it's clearly not happening at birth, right? which is a strong indication that it's happening at some other point. And indeed, that's what you sort of find is that it's really about people that stay in the regular practice of what's called divergent thinking in some cases, which is coming up with lots of ideas in a short period of time. Convergent thinking is the flip side of that, finding the right taking all of those ideas and finding the right one for that situation. These are things that are actually a practice. Mm-hmm. And too often I think we associate certain industries and certain people with that term creative, when in reality, it's a skill just like any other one. And you may have to unlearn a lot of bad habits and weird associations you have about what it is to think broadly and et cetera. But it's one that pretty much everybody can regain strength in. So that's probably, that's the biggest one if we want to go right from there. And we can unpack that, or you can keep quizzing me on other ones. Do the radio list thing, whatever you want to do.
The thing that I think is interesting about that, before we went live, I was telling David that I was telling you that I wanted to talk a little bit about this, because for me, when I look at what your books are about, it automatically overlaps, because I think, okay, if I know that friends of friends impact me, that it's not just my friends, but it's their friends, that if they're happy or if they gain weight or whatever, can actually impact my happiness, can impact, my chance of gaining weight, what does that say about creativity? If we're looking at becoming more creative, should we proactively go about, sort of looking at who we're hanging out with and who they're hanging out with and that sort of thing? Do you go that deep? Is that too weird?
Yeah.
Is that weird?
No. So yes, but in a different way than you probably think. And this is a good setup, actually. So the second, probably, if I had to rank the 10 myths, which I did not do in the book, I put them in, I don't remember what order, probably alphabetical. If I had to rank them, probably the second one is this idea that creative ideas come sort of out of the ether, wholly original, et cetera. We put it way up on this pedestal. In reality, every idea is a combination of pre-existing ideas. Every idea is a combination of things that came before. Right. So I was talking about Lucasfilm earlier, like Star Wars is probably the most grandiose example of this, because it's a giant bleshing of spaghetti westerns, samurai films, and World War II fighter films with a thin attempt at Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces sort of monomyth. And that's it. That's the movie, right? The original Star Wars.
The good ones.
I have no idea. I think the first three were trying to do that plus C-SPAN. I really don't know.
Plus C-SPAN?
But don't you remember? How many Senate meetings did we have?
That's true.
In the first three? No, right? It was awful. Yeah. Anyway, so if ideas are combinations of pre-existing ideas, then where you're getting your ideas, where you're learning from, who you're talking to, all of those sort of things matter. And we find that the people that are most prolifically creative, not because of innate sort of traits and what have you, but just in their careers are producing a lot, are the people that in some accounts are referred to as sort of T-shaped. They have a deep working knowledge of their field or their specialty, but they keep a broad working knowledge of lots of other stuff. So it's not that they're a mile wide and an inch deep. It's also not that they're a mile deep and an inch wide. It's that they've got a working knowledge. They're a mile wide and a couple inches deep. And then there's that one place where they're really, really a specialty in. And where the magic happens is where their specialty gets applied to one of those other areas that they're keeping a working knowledge of, or when they bring something from one of those working areas in. Again, if it sounds familiar, we're going back to that idea of structural holes and the idea that communities cluster, and it's the people that bridge the gap between those that create the newest combinations of ideas that are the most useful. And one of the examples I always give here, speaking of just sort of ripping off stuff, is everybody loves to talk about disruptive innovation, and they always give the Netflix versus Blockbuster thing. But time out, let's be honest. Netflix is a subscription service. Right. Like magazines. We've been doing that for 100 years. There's nothing new about it, right? It's literally just taking that idea and moving it over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. At the time, did it feel innovative? It wasn't really.
Because you didn't have to wait. It beamed it right to your...
It was,
originally it was mail DVDs.
Yeah.
It was like the old, where you paid 10 cents for the cassette tape.
Yeah, but you know what? People at first were kind of like, let's see. It wasn't until
That's what you did? You said, Let's see.
Yeah.
Because I was kind of like, I don't have to go to the video store. This is killer.
No, the video store was the place to go, though, Blake. You know, I mean, you missed out. Yeah, because that's where you could run into people.
Oh, and have friends of friends.
And reconnect with weak ties.
Exactly, weak ties.
Weak ties, bringing it all together.
To use your example, both models are actually a combination, right? So one is DVDs by mail. That's a subscription service like anything else. And then basically when they realized that the costs of doing a cable channel via the internet, which is probably how they would prefer to be thought of right now, is just we're HBO, but not through the coaxial cable, through the Ethernet cable.
Or the air from
that again is not a new model. It's just a new combination of different models. And that's really what I love about this idea is that when you frame it that way, it's two things. Number one, it lowers the pedestal, right? And now it's not, you have to be this rare breed of genius that can come up with this whole, it's just combining stuff and seeing what has value and being willing to throw away a lot of older combinations. And then the other thing is that it's controllable in the sense of you can pay attention to where you're getting your ideas. Mm-hmm. You're still hanging out with the same 5 people that you've spent your whole career sort of talking and guiding and mentoring. Or like that's great for bonding, but that's not all that good for new ideas that you can create new combinations with. And not to sort of bring it all home, but it again highlights the importance of being able to go to regular events where you're going to meet new people and reconnect with those old people so you can have this constant blending of new ideas.
So I have to say that was absolutely perfect because that actually tees up.
Here's a segue.
It is a great segue. It tees up the fact that Adele Sears and we are going to have this fantastic event coming up. That is a salon, a creativity without the risk.
A salon?
Yes, gathering on January 17th. And the whole concept is based on this idea.
I got to get one of those.
Man, we can make that happen.
No, I mean, you really do. Maybe we can send one with an Association Chat logo on it, and that would be brilliant.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's coming up. People you should check out on AssociationChat.com to find out more information about that. David, if people we're at the beginning of the year,
is this the wrap up? Are we going to the wrap up?
Yes.
Here? Okay.
People,
make sure.
My Lord, Blake,
I'll get my buttons ready.
You have a place to go? Okay. So, so it's the beginning of the year. People are trying to level up. They're trying to get stronger in all different ways. And, you know, when they look at this research that you've done in Friend of a Friend, what is probably the number one thing that they can take from that and apply to their lives in 2019 to level up, to make a big change?
Yeah, so this is the part where I'm supposed to say making a commitment to expanding and blowing up your network and meeting thousands of new people. The truth is, I mean, you look at the research, this research around weak ties, which we started with at the top, is incredibly compelling, not only in terms of meeting new connections, new information, et cetera, but even just in advice and counsel. Like one of the studies I dove into looked at executives who asked the normal trusted source of people and then had to reach back out to a dormant tie and ask them too, and then rate the quality of advice. The dormant ties were higher. So what I would encourage people to do is to get in the habit of reaching back out to your weak and dormant ties once a week, or maybe 2 people a week. That's not, we're talking about 100 people tops, right? But finding a reason to reach back out to somebody that you haven't spoken to in 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. And you know what? If you can't find a reason because you don't know that they love Neil Gaiman or you don't know if they're a fan of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you can literally just send them this email. Hey, you popped into my head today and I was thinking about you. I hope you're well.
Got that, Kiki?
And then that's it.
I love
write that down.
Please don't go into your pitch for your new thing or whatever.
I'm making a mental
note.
note.
You could write it down, but make it authentic to you, however you phrase those things. What's interesting is I think we feel like we're violating people's sacred space by hitting their inbox and whatever. And we probably are. But I've never been the recipient of an I was thinking about you and I hope you're well message that I decided that person was a jerk for.
That's a good point.
This has never happened.
That's a really good point.
And it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? Now, don't go into a sales pitch for your new thing. Don't try and sell them life insurance or whatever. But just the fact that you were thinking about them, you hope they're well, et cetera, is probably going to spark an additional conversation. And even if it doesn't, like you checked in with that person. And now the next time you need to reach out to them or they need to reach out to you, it's been a shorter distance of time between the last time.
I love this advice, you know, and this is just a PSA, by the way. A friend of mine just received a birthday card that had the person's logo on the back of it. And it's just like, choose when you're going to have your transactional messaging. That's all I've got to say. All right. So thank you so much, David, for being on the show. I really, really appreciate it. I think
Let's do the book one more time. What was
let's show the book. I want to show the book on there. Are you showing it live? And I'll hold it up here. Yes. It's
Where do we get it? I'm sure it's on the Amazon?
It's on the Amazon. You can go to davidburkus.com and also find a list of resources that he has. He has a really wonderful list of resources if you want to have a workbook to go along with your book, all kinds of stuff. You're a speaker, David. There's a million things that you can find that are of high value on there. So where can people find you other than that?
So, AssociationChat.com and the pages associated with this are probably going to be a good place because you already know the URL. But yeah, like you said, davidburkus.com is probably a good one. We do a daily video YouTube show with different tips like this often, so you can search that. I've got a really uncommon name, so literally just typing it into the Google, you'll probably find me and find the website about the books. Like you said about the speaking, we talk a lot both about myths of creativity and friend of a friend in associations, whatever, to try and make those networking cocktail parties not suck.
Yeah.
We do a lot there. Yeah. So all of that's at David Burkus.
All right. Thank you so much. And thanks to you, everyone, for taking part, being here, being on live, YouTube, and all of the things. If you're listening to this as a podcast, please make sure you share it with your friends, subscribe, hit the comments, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to Association Chat, produced by Amplified Growth and Human Factor. For more information on Amplified Growth, go to amplifiedgrowth.net. And for more information on making podcasts for your association, go to Human Factor at humanfactor.net. To hear past episodes, go to the Association Chat YouTube channel and subscribe. See you soon!